Hey, fellow babies, welcome back to Pachter Factor on SIFTD.net. I'm Michael Pachter. You can find me on Twitter at Michael Pachter. If you are watching this real time, it's because you are a subscriber to SIFTD or because you're a subscriber to YouTube. That gets us paid. Another way to get us paid is to link your Amazon Prime account to your Twitch Prime account. We have a brief video that explains how to do it. It takes about 3 seconds, and you have to re-up that every month or so. But please try to remember to do that. It costs you nothing. You're already paying for it. So all you're essentially doing is getting the free shipping part of Amazon Prime by getting us paid and getting free Pachter lovin'. So appreciate it if you can do that. All right, let's get to today's question. From SIFTD from ZN Trip. With this year's cancellation, what is the future of E3? Great question. Will there ever be another industry-wide in-person convention in the US? Why can't E3 pivot to be like Gamescom in Europe? What are some of your favorite E3 memories beside your parties? Let me kind of take these out of order. I think part of the problem that E3 faced was they went too extreme to make it business only back in 2007 or 8. So they did the Santa Monica experiment for a couple of years, and the shows are really bad. And then they swung back the other way in the mid-teens and started opening up to consumers, and it got a little too crazy for the publishers. And I think that having consumers there really doesn't work that early in the year. Games that are coming out in the fall just aren't polished enough in June to show, and so you couldn't get publishers interested in showing their games to an extraordinarily critical public who's going to notice every bug and post and say how bad the game is and don't buy it. So I think keeping it industry only probably would have saved it, but that wasn't the direction that the ESA decided to go. In fact, they decided to mimic PAX, and they hired ReedPop, who was a really good show operator. They were going to put it on. They were going to do a big consumer component to it. And what happened is that the ESA has a board that consists of the various players in the industry. So it's Microsoft, Sony, and Nintendo, and then all the big publishers. And that board authorized going ahead and committing to having E3, and then kind of serially, one by one, that board pulled out of attending the show that they were telling the ESA to sponsor. And Sony led this by pulling out back in 2019. I labeled that a mistake at the time. I continue to think it's a mistake. I think it's really bad for the industry not to have an industry-wide showcase that is a focal point for the press. I think that EA did ESA a disservice by moving off-site, and that's because their old CFO, who's not there anymore, found out that it would be cheaper to do their own thing and have the cameras focused on EA Play instead of EA being under the big tent and sharing with the other people. So I totally get why they did it, but it hurt E3. Microsoft did their own thing, sort of. So they just had their own venue, and it was right next door to E3. So they were there. They participated. But everybody else kept going. And this year, Nintendo pulled out. And I have no idea why. But now that you lost Sony and Nintendo, what are you going to do? Then Ubisoft pulled out, and then the ESA realized it didn't have critical mass. So, so we lost the show. I'll get to whether we're back or not. The only way to pull this off is not to be like Gamescom and not to be like Tokyo Game Show. You could do it in September, October if you wanted to, but that's kind of competing with Gamescom, which is end of August, and TGS, which is in September. I don't think that would be a popular solution. I think a June solution without focusing on consumers and focusing on the press and their business partners makes the most sense, and I think you don't have to have as big a display of all the games. I mean, I think they can kind of manage expectations better, but I think it's essential that they have a show, and I don't know that they will again. I think that if the membership, the board of the ESA decides they don't want to pay for it, they're not going to have a show. So we're going to have to wait until they make up their minds what they want to do. It isn't the ESA leadership who makes that decision. It's the ESA board. I know Microsoft favors a show. I kind of suspect Nintendo does too. And I think EA is going to get their mojo back. So EA's got some new leadership. I mean, Andrew Wilson remains the CEO, but they have a new president, CEO, and Laura Miele, and she's really good. And a new CFO who I think he came from Microsoft. And I think he's a lot less worried about saving his way to prosperity. And I think he understands investing in their core customer. So I think that, if you can get those guys back, Ubi obviously had a terrible year. Next year, a lot better. I think we have a chance of getting a show back, but I'm really disappointed. Some of my favorite E3 memories, I have to say, like, one of my favorite things, there was a, God, I forgot the name, Mark Echo game that was made by Atari, I think it was. And it was just like this spray paint, kind of street punk game, and I, not really sure what the object of the game was, but kind of skate street, painting up the graffiti. And I remember seeing Sam Hauser in the Atari booth playing the game and marveling at how great the game was and just saying, this is so much fun. And the game did terribly. But, just the idea that you could run into guys like that. I mean, the only reason my party has more memories for me is because I obviously see more people at my party. But I remember Don Matrick, who at the time was head of Xbox, walking up to me and saying, I hear Nolan Bushnell's at the party, the founder of Atari. And I was like, oh yeah, he's over there. And Don goes, can you introduce me? I've always wanted to meet him. And it cracks me up that, like, an industry luminary, the guy who runs Xbox, had never met the guy who founded Atari. And it was great. I mean, you walk them over and they get all excited to meet one another. So, and I got to say, a recent one, when they canceled the show, I posted one of my favorite photos, and it was Morgan Webb, Ed Boon, Todd Howard, and me. And some guy posts on Twitter, oh, that's so cool. Two of my favorites, Ed Boon and Morgan Webb. Who's the other guy? I'm like, yeah, that Todd Howard keeps photobombing us, like, hilarious. But the idea that somebody doesn't know who Todd Howard is, I love just that. I love that. But my absolute favorite ever was, I was talking to Yves Guillemot and Phil Harrison back when Phil Harrison was president of Sony Europe and Yves Guillemot president of Ubisoft. And I'm literally standing out somewhere in the hallway at E3 talking to the two of them, and this guy taps me on the shoulder and he says, excuse me, Mr. Pachter, can I get a selfie with you? And the two of them are like, he has no idea who we are. And Yves Guillemot is like 5'3", and Phil Harrison's 6'7". And bald. I mean, they just stand out. And this guy asked for my picture. So that was my favorite memory, because I said, hey, the guy obviously knows who's important here. I've got thousands of E3 memories, and I'm really going to be sad if we don't have another E3. The easy solution is to go back to the Santa Monica model, which is just business meetings. And I think you could pull that off. The problem is, if you just do business meetings, like, all the developers won't show up, right? And the developers are what makes it fun, So sure, you can just have all the managements of the companies come to LA for a couple of days, and you can have EA and Ubisoft and Square Enix and everybody in the same place, and they can meet with investors. But I think having the developers there actually matters. So I think the right solution, and I don't know that they'll pull this off, is get Geoff Keighley involved to host some kind of fun event with it. And I would do more of an educational series. Like, I would have developers there talking about how they made, how they made some mechanic in a game, how they do auto aim, or how they do, rumble in the controller, and what they put in the game for multiplayer, how they match up people, anything that would be educational and interesting that would cause other developers to want to come. And I would encourage all the publishers to bring as many developers as they can, and have like a big party for 3 days to celebrate the industry. So make it educational, somewhat the way GDC is, somewhat the way DICE is, where you have like interesting things. DICE is actually the right kind of conference. The DICE is 1,000 people. That's right. So those 1,000 plus the managements, I think you could pull it off. So if the ESA were to partner with DICE and kind of make that the event, I think that would actually really work. But it's asking a lot for them to get their act together in a year. I don't know that they will. And sadly, this is going on 5 years for them to get their act together. They had the last E3 in 2019. They haven't done it since. Like the ESA has books and records, and whatever they take in is owned by the publishers. So if the publishers approve an ESA budget, let's say $10 million of spending every year, the $10 million has to come from somewhere. They either make it from charging for booths at E3, or they make it by charging dues to the members. So the publishers know exactly what the ESA spends. There's no greedy. ESA doesn't make a big profit and then pay itself. Pay the employees. It's essentially a not-for-profit lobbying organization. It's not a charity. It's not a nonprofit, but it's a not-for-profit. If they make a profit, then they roll that in and spend it on their budget for lobbying or whatever the next year. But there's no slush fund. It's not like the ESA charges Sony $4 million and then suddenly just pays itself bonuses of $4 million extra. It doesn't work that way. So Sony, as a member and as a board member, has the ability to say, wait a minute, scale E3 down so we pay $2 million. We're willing to spend that, and they should get space that that reflects what their contribution is. I get it if you say it's too expensive because we have to ship 500 people there, but the expense is not the booth. The expense is all the people. Is bringing 500 people from Sony there and housing them and throwing parties. That Sony party had to be a couple $1 million every year. So I can't imagine that the actual booth space is really what killed it. And again, your company like Nintendo, that they were the anchor at E3. I think it would be healthy if Microsoft would move back inside under the tent with everybody else. I think it would be healthy if EA would do that. But it's arguable now that we haven't had one in 2020, 21, 22, 23. Do you need to bring it back? Everybody's gotten away without it. Now I will say the industry is doing terribly right now. So it seems to me very simple to say we got to try something different. And something different is let's put E3 back on and see if we get consumers interested. On the topic of people that hate E3 because they can't get in, that's the same as the Sony fanboy who doesn't want Microsoft to buy Activision. It's like, you can't put Activision games on Xbox because I don't own an Xbox and I'll never buy one. Therefore, they can't have them. And, the Xbox guys are like, no, the deal has to go through because Xbox rules and they need the content. And the fact is the games are going to be available on both. But it doesn't hurt you if there's an E3 and you don't go. You make your choices in life, and if you want to go to E3, go work in the games industry. You can go. So no, it's not that exclusive. Anybody who works in the games industry pretty much can go to E3. I mean, basically fill out an application and prove that you work in the industry, you get in for free. So it's really not that hard. And the people who say they hate it because they never got to go, well, get over yourselves. Thanks for joining us on Pachter Factor on SIFTD.net. If you are a Patreon patron and you're supporting SIFTD directly, thank you so much. If you are a YouTube subscriber, thank you. And if you are an Amazon Prime member and you have linked your Twitch Prime account to your Amazon Prime account, thank you. You should be getting this content real time if you do any of those things. If you have none of those options and you are stuck, just watching this stuff for free, you're getting it a week late, but that's the price you have to pay for Shane schlepping out to my house and taping this. Follow me on Twitter at Michael Pachter and tell me that I shamed you into following me, and I'll give you a shout out on Twitter. Thanks for joining us. See you next week.
Oh!